Welcome here. This reflection on the Sunday readings comes from the Contemplative Bagonnage. The website is in the link below. The readings are also linked below and appear on YouTube as a separate video. I've included all the readings appointed for today. That is the 2 tracks of readings from the Hebrew Scriptures, because I always find that having the 2 together is more helpful, even though in church services you will typically only have 1. And I know I'm not alone. Many people read both. So it's a good place to start with that video and to listen to the readings, give them time to sink in, and then come to this reflection. You probably noticed as you were listening to the readings that obedience and suffering and servanthood are all themed in every reading. And I want to begin, in fact, by focusing on the Gospel reading from St. Mark's Gospel, because I think in unpacking this, the other readings reflect into it more comprehensively. So in Mark 10 we hear that if anyone wants to be first, he shall be last, and who wishes to become great shall be your servant. So like a lot of Jesus teaching and like a great deal of wisdom teaching in the biblical tradition in general, there's a huge cognitive shift being asked of the listener. I want to now just go back briefly to Mark 8:36, not a reading for today, but just a bit earlier, where Jesus says, whoever wishes to save his life or his soul will lose it. In both the readings that I'm mentioning, Mark 10, Mark 8, the word for life and soul are not distinguished. It's the same word. And both of these readings are set after Jesus has disclosed his coming death. The disciple or to misunderstand, get it wrong, and then Jesus offers a correction, and these 2 are the correction. There's something to notice straight away in passing is that the disciples who continually get things wrong, the sons of Zebedee who long to be in some exalted place, the Peter denying Jesus' death, these issues with the disciples are often, I suppose, quite kindly explained by their lack of good theology, or their lack of attachment to Jesus and his teaching, their human frailty. What I think is typically overlooked is that Jesus is actually the servant of all. And it's really very easy to overlook somebody like that, who doesn't lord it over people, offers quiet wisdom rather than excitable and engaging political argument. He doesn't ever offer political solutions or engage in political discourse at all. He'd be absolutely hopeless on on a TV interview show. He's not interested in trying to sell some ideas. He's just calmly explaining things that are true. And that makes him easy to dismiss. And I think we do ourselves and the disciples a disservice if we don't frankly admit that there is something about the humility of Jesus that allows him to be overlooked, that allows him to be qualified. Well, maybe in his day that was true, but for us it's not quite so, because there is nothing strident there. There's no threat of execution. Okay, so we've got disturbed disciples who are arguing the toss with Jesus, and we've got the issue about saving and losing your life or your soul, and this unattractive idea that to be really great, which everyone wants to be, you have to be the servant of all. The humility has to genuinely be found. The egoic need to get on top and be on top has to be challenged and conquered. So before we leave the comparison of these two readings, I want to just spend a little second looking at the idea of saving your soul being very important, in fact the preeminent important thing in one's life. And this is the way that Mark 8 is often interpreted. And following on from that, this saving of souls is seen as more important than, for example, feeding the hungry. But in the reading set for today, Mark 10, we hear that Jesus is not saying that soul saving is the most important thing, but that the Son of Man, the human, came to serve and to give his life for the ransom of the cause of many. I'm drawing this out a bit, but it allows us to see something that I think is very important, that Jesus is not the singular person who goes to the cross so that we don't have to, as long as we protect our soul. Instead, in chapter 10, Jesus is calling us to follow him in his way to the cross. So discipleship is not a safety protocol, a health and safety document, a health and safety way of life. It is courageous and self-giving. It's attentive to God and God's wisdom. It's continually letting go of the need to have control, to be great, to have everything that one wants. In other words, to be completely dominated by thinking of the ego. All of this has to be let go. And this isn't offered by Jesus as a quid pro quo for God coming in to take your back, to offer protection, but that to save the soul or life is the reality, that is the background of what is going on. Your life, like the sparrows, like the seed on the ground, is cared for by God, and it is discernible in the wisdom that is open to us as we sink into the deep reality of what's going on. But it is typically obliterated by controls and demands and fractious behaviours in human beings. So on a sunny day when all is well, perhaps the idea of letting go can seem not too bad at all. But in suffering, it certainly seems very challenging. In the reading from Isaiah, we hear that God is reigning, that isn't in question, that God's reign is here, it's happening, you're in it. But the servant of God is despised and rejected and held of no account. That we all go astray. It seems to be in our nature, as it is the nature of sheep to wander. And this controlling behaviour leads to iniquity. It leads to cruelty, it leads to selfishness, greed, hatred, unkindness, violence. All of these horrors come out of the iniquity of people who are going their own way. The suffering servant is actually exalted and prospers even in the face of being despised and rejected. So those who've gone astray are not going to see that. They're not even going to glimpse it. In fact, they'll be full of contempt. And the servant is carrying the iniquity of all of broken humanity. So all those ugly things are met by the graceful, humble, gentle, wise, strong, courageous person. In fact, the pain of it all is unavoidable. From time to time, I think most people have glimpses of this in their own lives. Isaiah says that out of his anguish he shall see light, and he shall make many righteous and bear their iniquities. We see that in Mark's Gospel today. Jesus is already bearing with these demands of ego. The world has got to flow in the way I want it to flow, for my comfort, for my best plan, rather than letting go of the need to control that which cannot be controlled, and to instead live in the light and wisdom of God. And this is expressed so beautifully in Job, where we're towards the end of the book of Job in chapter 38, and Job, who's gone through all his sufferings, and we've had multiple arguments from his friends about why he deserved it and so on. But Job's continual cry is that he will have his day in court with God, that he's going to be able to stand and question God and demand answers and explain that he had done nothing wrong and this is completely unfair. Well, the day eventually dawns, and faced with God, God asks Job, well, who is this? Who are you that have come here with lots of words but without any knowledge? Full of mind chatter around the suffering that he is experiencing. The questions God asks Job are very penetrating they're really asking, what do you actually know about anything? You want to say this is unfair and that shouldn't have happened, and there needs to be some reckoning, and you owe me 50 quid. And actually, God is saying, it's not real, Job. Look at yourself. Were you at the beginning of creation? Look at the natural world and the way it works. There is so much there that is inestimably larger than your personal suffering and more than you can understand. You're sunk into your own little world. We don't hear it in this portion of the reading for today, but Job does actually realise that he just doesn't understand, and does let go of all of that demand that God accounts to him about the way the world is, and instead is able to let go of all of that and be at peace. The epistle is from the letter to the Hebrews. Nobody's really clear who wrote this document, although it's often attributed to Paul. It's pretty clear he didn't write it. The portion we have today tells us that the Word of God, the movement of God, the Spirit of God, that which comes forth from God, is living and active, and also sharper than any two-edged sword. It divides the soul from the spirit and judges the thoughts and intentions of the heart. This is really pithy treatment of what we've been discussing. God is active, alive, and moving in all that is, and the very ground of our actual being, the ground of everybody's being, the ground of every blade of grass, or eagle overhead, or puppy, sheep, that just of all that is, including, of course, you. So God is active and alive in, through, and around you, and all that you experience of life, of all the deep reality, not the stuff that's going on in your head about the way things should be, or any of that just distracted and abstract removal from the deep reality. And part of that deep reality is the intention of the heart. And this is this author is trying to help us understand that this sharp divide comes in to sever the soul from the spirit. And what they're talking about here is, and this, it's hard, isn't it, because the same words are used in different ways, but here the intention is that we understand that that part of us that is precious and naturally the divine spark within us, the divine breathing within us, is separated from the desires, the egoic desires of the human mind, this extraordinary level of extra busyness that we are saddled with, really, as the human condition, and that there is a discernment, a judgment. It's a very harsh word, but a discernment around the intentions and thoughts of the heart. So this is the seat of the God understanding of wisdom, and it is discerning. It is discerned by God, not. There's no fooling God. Not that we're really trying to, but the force of God, the active life of God, is at one with the loving nature and the divine longing in the human heart, and absolutely nothing, no connection with this strange egoic behaviour that is so easy to slip into. So drawing together the observations from these readings, I think they're particularly helpful in facing suffering in our lives. Suffering comes to us all, and to some of us it comes in extraordinarily difficult, ferocious amounts. But as people of God, as followers of Jesus, as disciples of the Christ, we are called to a life of courage, the courage to let go of the need to force things into a different shape and to accept them as they really are. And then in that letting go, to find, almost as though God slips God's hand into ours. Just as we let go, there's that touch, there is that awareness that God is fully present, fully connected with us in our suffering, in our living, in our soul, in our heart. So just to end, let's go back to the Gospel today. Jesus asks the sons of Zebedee if they're able to drink the cup that he's going to drink. And they say they are, and indeed they will, but one's has the impression that they haven't got a clue what they're saying there. But it's an interesting aside to notice that some authorities say that the Romans would share a cup before going into battle, signifying their willingness to die alongside each other. The original ending of Mark's Gospel doesn't include the resurrection, and some later author added that in to perhaps cheer the story up a bit. But in Mark's Gospel, and often in life, especially where suffering comes, we are led with increasing urgency and intensity, almost to the very edge of a great abyss that we can sense is there, a terrifying and great abyss. So the Gospel of Mark leads us to find the real meaning of life, the real meaning of Jesus, to identify in our own experience what is life and what is death, and to have courage to follow Jesus. In the Hebrew epistle, we also heard about obedience. The word appears twice in today's reading. It can be translated differently from obedience, and perhaps it is more helpful to think about attentive hearkening. Attentive hearkening is a way that word is translated quite often. It also has elements in it of compliance and submission. I think nothing could be more calculated to annoy the individualistic, liberal-minded Western thinker than these ideas. But they're really an expression of what we've already been talking about. This obedience we see in Jesus, or the active hearkening to God moment by moment, is learnt particularly in his suffering. We hear he learnt obedience through what he suffered, making him perfect, and the source of eternal salvation for all those who then obey or hearken to him. We hear he's a great high priest, obviously not like the high priests we hear of in the Gospels, but in the order of Melchizedek, who appears very briefly in the Hebrew Scriptures to Abraham, to aid Abraham in an extremely low time of his, a time of suffering for him. Melchizedek is the king of righteousness, the king of peace, and the high priest of the God, for God. He offers bread and wine and blessing. So when we see Jesus as great high priest, this is it. It isn't the exalted position of somebody stuck on a unassailable post, but somebody who's the servant of all and the king of righteousness, the king of peace, a priest to God, offering bread, wine, and blessing.